Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, puts it as aptly as anybody in the world could put it today. We are now confronting, and have for some long period of time, a new and different evil in the world by people who are totally fanatics. I think that was precisely what he said. And who are, and this is the key to all this, of course, are utterly indifferent to the people they are attacking. They are launching an attack on the United States of America, totally indifferent. As one of the people who'd been, as the young man who took photographs for us on the site itself down at the Trade Tower said earlier today, utterly indifferent to the people who may be in any of these locations, whether they could have been brothers or aunts or relatives even of the people who launched these attacks. That is not unimaginable because the world is such a mobile place at the moment. And there, in that report from Jim Woot, you also see, under any number of circumstances in other places, security guards whipping out their guns and going to do what they do for their individual clients, because everywhere in the world today, this is true in the Soviet Union, in the former nations of the Soviet Union, this is true all over we've lived with the Balkans now, everybody lives with the possibility that this is going to happen to the person they work for or are close to or in their community. And now the United States, as it was at the time of Oklahoma City, I'm reminded, I try to draw a parallel for you without getting too long-winded about this, that in Israel and in the Palestinian territories today, this is how people live. They walk around in both Israel and the Palestinian territories, doesn't matter where in Israel, doesn't matter where in the Palestinian territories, totally conscious all the time that this could indeed happen to them at any given moment. ABC's John Miller has been off for a while talking because he knows them better than most of the police and the fire department, and you arrived and said there's no good news.
No, in fact, the news is bad. There's only more difficulty. What we expected to learn was that there were rescue operations going on, and of course our own reporters have told us that it seems that police and fire rescue workers have drawn back. That, I am told, is because 7 World Trade Center, which is a building, part of the World Trade Center complex, it's the building across Vesey Street from the 2 Twin Towers. Ironically, as you and I spoke with Jerry Howard much earlier, it is the building that headquarters the New York City Emergency Management Office, a bunker that was built to withstand explosion, hurricane, and disaster. 7 World Trade Center is possibly structurally unsound, and they fear that if that building goes, it could cause so many more injuries to rescue workers in the rubble of what was the Twin Towers across the street. So they are continuing to fight the fire, but they've pulled the rescuers back until they can really assess what's going to happen with that building.
And Bob Jameson, who we talked to, who gave us first early warning of this some time ago, wasn't sure exactly how tall that building was. Number 7 World Trade Center is 47 stories tall, and I assume, maybe you know, but listen first of all. Again, you hear the sounds. I apologize, I thought it was something new coming. John, I assume that the 7, the World Trade Center, has been evacuated?
Yes, it's been evacuated, and they're just trying to assess what they can do to it to ensure its structural stability before they send people in to go through the rubble and look for survivors.
And do they believe this was made structurally unsound by the concussion of the Twin Towers falling?
Yes, and literally by the fact that so much of one of the Twin Towers fell on top of the building. In fact, as Jerry Howard told us earlier, people couldn't get in or get out of the entrances because it was buried in the rubble of the Twin Towers, most of the ground floor of it. They've been able to get people out, but they don't know that the building is safe.
Do your police and fire department contacts believe that under the rubble here of the North Tower, which collapsed, which we have seen, which we're looking at this moment, do they believe that there's survivors under there?
They are certainly holding out the possibility and the hope, especially since so many of them are police and fire personnel. There's a real difficulty for them right now because their instinct is to run in and save their people, and perhaps cooler heads in the emergency management have said we can't afford to lose any more people if another building goes. So they're terribly torn between their instincts to rescue the civilians and their own colleagues, and the numbers of unaccounted for among the police and fire as they do their spot roll calls to relocate everybody who responded are growing.
Stay with me for just a second, because I want to talk very briefly who's on the telephone. Gary Breeze, who's the head of the International Association of Firefighters, who will have been in contact with the fire departments here in New York City. Do you hear me, Mr. Breeze?
I can hear you, thank you.
I know exactly what your sentiments are today, and I think John Miller has made it very clear. Everybody runs and your people go in. But in your contacts today, we've been working with the notion that a couple of hundred firefighters may be missing. Do you know anything about this?
We still have several hundred firefighters unaccounted for. Fire Department of New York, when they send an initial assignment to the World Trade Center, it involves about 125 firefighters on the initial assignment. And without a doubt, when they realize the severity of the situation, they dispatch greater alarms, and probably had between about 300 firefighters on the scene before the first collapse occurred. The issue here is now the criticality of the next 24 to 36 hours. We're moving from the initial impact of this incident to the rescue and recovery phases. And one of the challenges, as Jerry Hauer was saying, is that the desire for rescue. We find statistically that about 90% of the people that are rescued from building collapses are rescued in the first 24 hours. So this next time period will be very critical for the rescue of injured people.
Now, Mr. Breeze, as you have talked to your colleagues in New York, where are you, by the way?
I happen to be in Denver today.
Right. As you've talked to your colleagues in New York, do you get any sense from them about whether what you describe as rescue and recovery is going to be more recovery than rescue?
I think it's going to be both. The World Trade Center is a horrific disaster. The primary rescue efforts will be taking place in the buildings that surround the World Trade Center. We have some 8 urban search and rescue teams on the way there now, but they will take at least 24 hours to become operational.
Is this one of those situations where fire departments, not dissimilar from a forest fire, where fire departments are coming in from long distances, or is there enough men and material in the immediate area to help?
I think from the initial response, fire departments from the New York area, surrounding New York City, New Jersey, Connecticut, and maybe even Pennsylvania, have already begun moving toward New York City. The urban search and rescue teams are coming from as far away as California.
What do you mean by an urban search and rescue team? Is this the same kind of team that would go to an earthquake?
Yes, these are the structural collapse rescue teams. And for New York City, there's 3 teams coming from California, 1 team coming from Massachusetts.
Mr. Breeze, let me interrupt you, because we've had another building collapse. ABC's Bob Jameson. Bob Jameson? Okay. There has been another building collapse in lower New York. It may, and we won't even speculate as to what it is, but another building has collapsed. Just reconfirming that when the 2 trade towers collapse, you see people moving. These people are not as close as they look. They're at some distance away because the police have kept them at this distance. And another building, and maybe, John, you can recognize this, in this immediate area. I'm not going to speculate that it's number 7, but because a number of buildings in the immediate adjacent area are vulnerable.
This is looking towards the World Trade Center, and that dark building in the upper left-hand corner is the telephone company on West Street. So this is a few blocks north, looking south. This is from 6th Avenue and Canal Street, looking south.
And do we know how close either you, I'm going to bring George Stephanopoulos in a moment, do we know how close this collapse might have been to the trade towers? You know the streets well. What you see, the smoke coming up from this structure. I'm trying to discern from the pictures if that is the bottom of the World Trade Center or another building. Okay, the Associated Press is just reporting. George Stephanopoulos, are you in a position? We think this is Trade Center building number 7, which has collapsed.
Yes, I'm not positive, Peter, but we are pretty sure that it is. One of our crew here saw it go straight down, and you're now trained on the plume of smoke coming straight out of that building. It happened just moments ago. It happened within 5 minutes, and that looks to be certainly within that immediate vicinity of the Trade Center. It just went straight down.
Then in all likelihood, this is probably number 7, the building which...
It's the one. For several hours now, Peter, the police have been concerned that there was going to be another collapse. They were concerned that World Trade Center number 7 was the most likely to collapse, and it certainly is in that square where the World Trade Center was.
And there you get a good look from that graphic of the relationship between number 7 and the North and the South towers. And there's the World Financial Center down at the foot of the North Trade Towers. You may have been with us a little earlier on today when Betsy Stark, our business reporter, just pointed out the huge number of businesses that are in there. Morgan Stanley, I think it was, she said, had 50 stories in the one building. And there are also government buildings. New York State has offices in the Twin Trade Towers itself. The Port Authority.
Entities, the U.S. Customs Service, the United States Secret Service, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which ironically is tasked with investigating explosives and post-blast scenes, are all headquartered in the buildings just beneath the World Trade Center's Twin Towers within the same complex. They're the lower buildings in the courtyard there. So obviously they've all been affected. And if in fact, as it appears, as you look here, you do not see 7 World Trade Center in this part of the skyline here. The brown granite and glass building that should be there does not appear in this frame. So if in fact it is the building that went down, it's an indicator that the decision to keep rescue workers out of the Twin Towers area was probably a wise one. It probably saved many more lives. Now, from this vantage point,
you cannot see it. It would just be to the north, to the lower right portion of your screen, right. Building number 7
it
there.
Would be that brown one just to the right of the Twin Towers, the lower one.
In the World Trade Center itself, Morgan Stanley has 21 floors. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey has half a dozen floors. One of the big risks service insurance companies, AON, has 3 floors in the North Towers. Empire Blue Cross has 7 floors in the South Tower. Another insurance company has 7 floors. Bank of America has 3 floors. Deutsche Bank, the German bank, now International Bank, has 3 floors as well. So, and as John was talking there, the evocation a little bit of what happened in Oklahoma City is taking a look at the New York skyline there, and John, yes. Take us across the skyline there.
We're coming down from the Woolworth building. Right. You're seeing where number 7 World Trade Center once stood. Now you're seeing the building that would have been directly next to it. This brown building in the right corner of the frame was the next door neighbor to the building, which is now just a large puff of smoke. That's a telephone company facility that was directly across the street from what was a skyscraper.
But you were pretty sure when we were talking just a few minutes ago, based on talking to the cops and the fire department, that building was essentially empty.
I was told that they had done an evacuation, and I had the impression it was complete because they weren't talking about a furious continuing of that. Of course, they had moved people, emergency people, out of the scene, but you still don't know. I mean, there's always a skeleton crew operating there. There was fire trucks and firefighters working from a distance to fight the fires in the rubble in the area. So while they hadn't had the full army of rescue workers that could have been there present, you didn't have that.
George Stephanopoulos. Go ahead, George.
As we said before, we're about 20 blocks away from the World Trade Center site, but we were getting some of the silt and debris up here, this far away from the World Trade Center. Secondly, Peter, there is a much more heightened activity from police cars, dump trucks, and other emergency vehicles now in the area. They're congregating about 3 blocks away and looking to go down towards the World Trade Center. We just saw 3 police cars go by and other cars that were completely covered in dust and debris.
Is Gary Breeze from the Firefighters Association still with us?
Yes, I am.
I'm sorry, Peter.
And I was just asking for Gary, do you know whether or not number 7 had been fully evacuated in the course of the last 7 or 8 hours?
No, not firsthand, but I can tell you that if it was possible to be evacuated, it would have been cleared out. That's one of the first jobs that a firefighter will undertake, is getting the civilians out of the buildings. And I think it's reasonable, since they've had this much time, and it wasn't terribly structurally damaged in the initial blast, they probably got everybody out.
Okay, Gary, thank you very much. And George, we'll let you all go back to working your sources at the minute. The Mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, is going to have another news conference in a little while to now, and there's no person in the city who has a better handle at this point on everything that is happening. He was a little reluctant, understandably, to give some sense of magnitude early on in terms of casualties, but he surely knew this was coming as we did. And while we are waiting for him, take a slight right turn here for the moment and talk to our aviation expert, John Nance. It's actually not a right turn. It takes us back to the very beginning of this day. John, are you there on the phone? John Nance?
Yes, I sure am, Peter. Can you hear me? Yes, Peter, can you hear me?
I can indeed, John. And one of the things that just comes as, I think, a shock to people today is that for the most part we thought that U.S. airliners were, if not immune from hijacking, were far better able to handle such situations. And we get 3 major aircraft on 2 major airlines in one day. How is it possible?
Peter, I think we've all been aware in commercial aviation that no matter how we hardened up the system against the casual hijacker, in other words, the middle case, or somebody who really isn't terribly well organized, we've always known that our vulnerability level remained very high for somebody who intended to commit suicide and who was determined to do a lot of planning to know exactly what to do and how to do it to break in. And I think that's what we have seen today. This is the type of threat that has been our worst nightmare as commercial air crews and in the commercial aviation business, because if we tried to harden our system against this, we'd get fewer than 20% of the normal air traffic in the air every day.
What do you mean by that? By harden the system against it, you'd only get 20% up every day?
Well, Peter, we don't know exactly how these people got on board. We don't know what happened, but El Al is a good example. They have not had an incident in a long, long time because they're extremely careful.
The Israeli airline.
Travel with them, yes, correct. If you travel with them, you are going to answer questions. You are going to be very carefully looked at. They know who they carry, and that's one reason they've been so safe. But if we tried to apply that same level of security to the entire civil air traffic system of the United States, we would cut down the amount of air traffic down to 1/5, and that's probably being conservative.
Is it your feeling, John, that at the moment, I realize you can't agree to this wholly given what's happened today, that the system is about as tight as the public will tolerate, given the extraordinary amount of air travel we do? That's an issue, right?
I think we can do what we... Yeah, it is difficult, but I think we can do what we do a lot better, Peter. But I don't think that, basically, that we have a situation here in which we can get much more tight.
Now, John, I think it was you, or can you still hear me, John? John Nance can't hear me for a second, but while they try to reconnect us with him, because he's so good on this particular subjects, I think it was John or earlier who said that the modern airplane, the 757 and the 767, were both involved today, are such sophisticated aircraft in the cockpit that they're actually simpler to fly, and so it is clear, John believed earlier, that whomever did this today on board the aircraft itself had to have some knowledge of how to steer a plane into a building, because no one today has been able to believe that a commercial airline captain on a U.S. aircraft would not sacrifice his own life rather than fly his own airplane into a building full of people. John, I'm just reviewing. You back with me now? John Nance?
Yes, I'm back with you.
I'm just reviewing this notion you brought up earlier. I'm reviewing this notion you brought up earlier today, that someone who was determined to fly an aircraft into 2 buildings like this, 3 including the Pentagon, didn't have to be an expert flyer to get at the controls. Explain again, would you?
Well, I think anyone who has, in our terms, a licensed pilot, even somebody who flew a smaller airplane, could manipulate controls of a jetliner once it got in the air. The problem is that if you're doing the planning for something this heinous, and you want to make absolutely sure that all of your aircraft reach their targets, you're going to want to put pilots who have some exposure to this type of airplane, or at least this class of airplane, into those seats. And that's why I don't believe that we had anything other than pilots that were put into this position, and probably the air crews I'm speculating wildly, obviously, but I would imagine that the air crews that were assigned to those flights were probably killed very rapidly.
So it would take a minimum of experience, but some familiarity with a cockpit of a 757 or a 67 to do what was done today.
I believe so, Peter,
Is that what
because,
you're saying,
again, you know, that is what I'm saying. I'm saying that any pilot could get into those cockpits with an airplane in flight and physically pull and push and turn and manipulate that airplane. But if you're planning this and you want to make sure that they do it right and they don't mess it up somehow, you're going to want people who have had exposure to that class of airplane. And that's where I think we may end up seeing this investigation go.
And I actually think, if I recall correctly, that many hours ago you raised the notion, you raised the possibility that someone who did this had some time in a simulator.
There is a high likelihood that if you were going to plan this, again, over a period of time, a year or two, that you could, if you were the planning organization, find a way to get your pilots that you wanted trained into a simulator someplace in the world. There are a lot of 757 and 767 training, or a lot of it available. And, you know, our people train air crews from all over the world, our people meaning in the United States. We wouldn't necessarily have any clue of what was in their hearts or what they were planning to do if they came in the door from a legitimate carrier or even a private operator of a 757, because there are some private ones out there.
Thank you, John. Is there anything else you need to add? Please, go ahead.
Yeah, just one other thing. This is an unusual situation, and one of the little flags in this, Peter, at this early stage is the fact that we're talking about only 757s and 767s. That is the only combination of big airplanes that have what we call a common type rating. In other words, if you're rated in one, you can fly the other. The cockpits are almost identical. And that may be of no consequence here. It may have simply been coincidental, but it also raises a little flag that maybe we are dealing with somebody who planned this on the basis of having trained for this type of airplane.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much indeed, which certainly speaks to the point that any number of analysts of terrorism, somebody said this morning, nobody wants to be described as an expert on terrorism today, as analysts of terrorism and terrorism activity, and who try to monitor it around the world as effectively as they can, have said this was today a very sophisticated operation. We do know now, we believe, that about 100 people are believed to have been killed or injured in today's attack on the Pentagon. And as John McWethy from the Pentagon has said to us on several occasions, there is no guarantee that that is the final number. But currently, the information from the Pentagon is that 100 people are believed to have been killed or injured in today's attack. And you recall that Mayor Giuliani of New York, the closest he has come to giving casualty figures, which he's very understandably reluctant to do, that 2,100 people were injured, 600 taken to hospital, 1,500 walking wounded taken to Liberty State Park, which is on the other side of the Hudson River, actually in New Jersey, where the Statue of Liberty, all this in full view of the Statue of Liberty, and that various hospitals from New York City all the way to Canada are treating people today who have been somehow injured in this. Now, I want to talk to Lynn Scher, who has been following the aircraft all day. That is the American and United Airlines planes involved in these incidents. Lynn?
As you well know, the only video that we've seen of an actual crash was of that second flight. That was the United flight that crashed into the second World Trade Tower. What we're going to show you now is some very crude animation of the first flight. That was American Airlines 11. That's the flight from Boston to Los Angeles that went into the first World Trade Tower. What this is animation based on the track of the plane, data coming from the FAA. You're going to hear Walter Cross, the programmer, describing it.
The flight took an immediate hard left turn due south. The speed initially decreased by over 100 miles an hour, and then increased to over 500. And then as it approached the New York area, it slowed to all the way down to about 300 knots. So and then tragically it impacted in the World Trade Center. American 11 was indeed the first flight, we have confirmed that, of the two.
And that, again, that was the voice of Walter Cross, the programmer who put that animation together. What that shows you is this flight on its way to Los Angeles headed due west and then made that very sharp turn. Mr. Cross also told us that there was an indication of some air violence right before that left-hand turn, violent changes in airspeed as the plane went off track to head into the World Trade Towers. On that flight, 92 people, not counting the hijacker. And Peter, I've done some very quick calculations. Of course, all of the planes involved in today's incidents were headed to California. 3 of them to Los Angeles, 1 to San Francisco, 2 had left Boston, 1 from Dulles, 1 from Newark Airport. Total number of passengers and crew, 266 people, not, of course, counting the hijackers. Peter?
Thanks very much, Lynn. And the issue of taking off from Boston and Dulles and all headed for California, John Miller raised the issue before of whether or not, there are lots of reasons, and again we'd be speculating, but he makes the point that aircraft taking off from Boston and Dulles outside Washington to go to California would have full loads of fuel on them, thereby creating a far greater explosive potential without having had to have explosives on board and getting them past U.S. security either at Dulles Airport or at Boston. 266 people on the aircraft alone today who have died in this attack on the United States and on the American people. Now, in our control room, somebody says there is a... Let me go first to Bill Blakemore and then perhaps to Joe Torres of WABC, our affiliate in New York. Bill Blakemore, you there? And I gather you saw number 7 come down.
Yes, I did, Peter. I'm standing right on the West Side Highway. The skyline of the financial district has changed again. Just a few minutes ago, I was talking to some people. I was facing north. I saw a shock in their face, heard screams, spun around, and then we just watched the building fall in on itself. I believe we have a little bit of tape here. That's, Peter, it was an astonishing thing because the civilians who were standing around here were all amazed, but things have become so bizarre down here that the hundreds of firemen who were standing around looked at it, felt a bit shocked, but then just said, well, we're going to have even more work to do. Associate producer Lucy Kerrigan had been over near that building just a little bit earlier, and the policeman had told her that they feared the building was going to come down, that they were evacuating people from around it. So that's one little bit of good news, is that there may have been fewer casualties from this latest collapse than there otherwise might have been because they knew of the potential. But it's now still a very hot day here. The search and rescue operation is mounting even larger. There are dozens and dozens of fire trucks backed up on the West Side Highway, police trucks. There are what look like hundreds of volunteers who have showed up, who have been marshaled by the Red Cross, all with masks to avoid breathing in dust, but nobody can go in yet. We're still looking at buildings that are on fire down in the center of the financial district, and it's clearly a great deal of devastation. It's not too strong a word at all. It's going to take a while even to assess how bad it is.
Bill, do you have any idea whether or not other buildings in the immediate area are vulnerable at the moment, whether there's concern about any other building as there was about this additional one after the towers?
Well, from the angle I'm looking at, we can see one other building still on fire, and it seems to be on fire through the length of it. I would estimate that's like about a 30 or 40 story building. The problem for any one of us, of course, is that because of the other buildings down here still standing, which are so tall, you can't get a very clean view of the whole thing from the ground. But there's at least one, and it's clearly going to go on into the night. There's a lot of black smoke pouring out of that building now.
Thank you, Bill. We just stay with this photograph for this graphic for just a second. Well, no, there's number 7 coming down. When you think that part of the component of news coverage around the country every year is the excitement and the fun that people get watching an old building being demolished, and they wire it very carefully for days, and it's a very careful operation in order to make sure that a building comes down safely. I think the last one we saw was when they brought down one of the old casinos in Las Vegas. I mean, this is just stunning to see these things come down inside, in the case of the north and south towers there of the World Trade Center, come down within a couple of hours as a result of the structural damage, weakening that was done when these aircraft hit them. And now number 7, the World Trade Center, which is 47 stories tall. We're talking with the World Trade Center north and south 110 stories tall. an eerie experience to be in them at the best of times. They sway in the wind, and people have long had experiences with them. But those, and as Bill Blakemore said just a moment ago, the landscape of New York City has changed one again. And in this instance, it's not New York City, it's not New Yorkers' cities, it's everybody in the country's city at this moment, because this was an attack on the United States, no question about it. Everybody said it all day, a declaration of war, an act of war against the United States. We've had a number of politicians and commentators, us included, who were reminded that the last time there was an attack like this on the United States was Pearl Harbor, which finally induced the United States to get fully involved in World War II.